Okay, let's go ahead and get this thing started. If Keith, if you and Claudia want to come on camera,
Yeah,
that would be great. There you are. No,
all right.
Okay.
So hi, everybody. I am Keith Boswell. I'm the VP of Marketing here at ADHD Online. We are honored to be joined again today by our good friend Rick Webster, the CEO of Reframe. They are an economic partner to their clients and customers, and really helping them understand how they spend and maybe even why they're spending. So Rick's been a really great resource for our patients and our audience, and helping the ADHD audience understand some of the impulsivity, some of the different things. And we're excited today because Rick has a wealth of topics that he presents on. And so today we're going something a little more broadly. It's all about, I think a lot of times, too often, we are caught in the negatives of ADHD. In fact, I'll just really quick, Rick, before you get started, I was diagnosed this past year at 49, and I'd actually had a therapist previously tell me they suspected I had ADHD. And I really just dismissed it because I said, I don't fit this negative stereotype I have of ADHD in my mind. And it's ironic that starting a job at ADHD Online was kind of the first point where it really began sinking in. But I think a lot of the conversations we have, especially today, are about finding the positive and really like flipping it around from being the thing that held you back to the thing that can help you advance. So I'm very excited to have this discussion. We welcome everyone's thoughts. I think with all of that, I'll turn it over to Rick. And so thanks again for joining us today, Rick. We really appreciate it.
No, and I'll tell you something I appreciate is that usually I give these talks. Some of the people know that I give these talks on your platform roughly once a month. And
right.
I really do appreciate the opportunity to do that. Today you're on ours, and I appreciate your coming our way. But since we're not on your platform, I think maybe we should take just a moment and tell us what ADHD Online is all about. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so we're essentially two practices under one roof. We are a assessment and diagnosis practice where doctorate level psychologists that are licensed in all 50 states review people that take review assessments that our patients give, typically about 250 to 270 questions, really very similar to the type of questionnaire you would fill out if you went for traditional testing in person. We typically deliver those results back in about 3 to 5 days. And then our patients can do one of two things. They can either take that diagnosis if they're diagnosed, or if they're excluded and they have some insights on their mental health, they can go back to their provider to seek treatment and further evaluation. Sorry about that. And or the second half of our business is they could choose to do medical treatment or teletherapy with us. I believe today in 39 states we offer medical treatment via telehealth. And then in 10 states currently, we're offering generalized therapy. But that's certainly an area that's growing, and we're always looking at adding on additional things that kind of bring that support service to the ADHD community.
Yeah, and it's no part of the reframing. We do want to reframe things to the positive, but what we really want to do, in my opinion, is reframe them to ways in which give us control of our own lives, as opposed to having us feel like a victim of our lives, right? And someone says that we're operating in a deficit, and we have a disorder going on, and it's a lifelong pathology. We'll never be quite as good as anybody else. Maybe we can be almost as good if we work really hard at it. That's really a damaging place to come from, and it's not true, right? I'm not saying reframe things in a way that it's called a Pollyannish, and so we just feel good in the moment, but to reframe them so they're actually more true. It's no accident that you're in the position that you're in, right? And by the way,
true,
ADHD is contagious. You probably didn't have it until you got involved with all the rest of us, so you got that.
Yeah, I know that, but it is funny. I mean, it's kind of the thing that's been staring me in the face. And so it is kind of the place I was supposed to end up. You're absolutely right.
It's no accident that
Yeah.
20 to 25% of the CEOs in this country have ADHD. It's not an accident. Right. And that tells me right off the bat, this is not a deficit disorder. It's a neurological brain function difference. It's a physical difference in the brain. And it has some positive aspects and obviously some drawbacks. And we need to rein in those negative aspects in order to take advantage of the positive. But yeah, I want to take advantage of the positive side. I want to be realistic about what it really is. And for me, and I learned this very early on, I got involved with some of the right people very early. I'm grateful for that. It's about taking responsibility for my own life and not buying into the idea that, you know, I'm operating at a deficit. I'll never be able to get this stuff right. You know, there are some things I'm not very good at, right? I could never have been an NBA star. That doesn't mean that I'm operating in a deficit. It just means that I don't have those capabilities. I have other capabilities. So we have to go with that. It's good to understand it. You know, Ned Hollowell and John Rady, they are coming out with something very soon. I'm not sure how the whole political process works with these things in the medical community, but they're working at relabeling ADHD. It's been relabeled several times in its history, right? And they're working at relabeling it as VAST, variable attention, something I've forgotten now, but it's really fascinating.
As that just feels more relatable to me, actually, just as a phrase. Anyway, VAST really describes sometimes how ADHD feels in my brain. The depth at which I can think about things or kind of foresee. So that's interesting. I like it personally, just gut reaction.
Yeah, I think it's, I'll paste it here. I'll probably lose half the people because they're going to go watch this video, but if you want, hold off and watch it at the end. But I'm going to paste this in there. Very interesting, just 5 minutes of Ned Hollowell talking about it. But it's both he and his kind of partner. They co-wrote the Driven Distraction series. They've always been on that side that I believe in, which is that, you know, ADHD is a rose with thorns, right? It has some drawbacks. It's got some really nice things about it, and we need to be in there. So for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to do like 30 seconds because I want to get into all this, but Renify is a behavioral finance platform right now in the ADHD field because 61% of us have financial difficulties at any given time, and they're recurring. We are about $20 a month. But if you do have financial difficulties or difficulties with impulsive shopping, all these different things, that's what we do. We're a small community. We talk about those things, and we have classes and all that. As a matter of fact, this is a precursor right now. We're going to have a 6-week class on reframing ADHD for ourselves because it's very damaging the way people walk around thinking that they have these outside produced problems, and they're not. Someone in Renify, actually, in an earlier thing, just quoted Viktor Frankl, who's one of my, it was life-changing for me to read some of his things very early on. But she quoted a part, and I don't know the whole quote, but there's a stimulus and there's a response. And the part that makes us human, in my opinion, is, and what he said was there's a stimulus, and then there's a pause in between, and we can choose our response. Right? We don't have to react. No one pushes your buttons. We push our own buttons, right? Someone says something, our buttons are in our own head, right? We can choose how we're going to react to whatever that person said to us. We can choose to not believe it, to blow it off, to get all flipped out and angry. You know, we choose that reaction. It's not, other people don't make us do those kind of things. We do them ourselves. And I think that we want to take our power back. In that respect, that's our power, is to be able to say, this person said something, I get to choose what I'm going to do about that. Viktor Frankl really understood, I think, how we are free to choose our attitudes about our own lives. And this is part of what this reframing is about, is to stop thinking of it as a outside imposed issue of you know, a deficit. I'll never be quite as good. I'll never be able to figure this stuff out. Changing that around to saying, you know, I have a lot of strengths, I have some weaknesses, and I'm going to, you know, it's my responsibility. My life is no one else's responsibility but mine. So ADHD
You know what's
really,
interesting, Rick? I just real quick, I'm just thinking. I mean, I think one of the things that was eye-opening for me and that I realized, after I was diagnosed, some of the things that had frustrated me previously, I realized that they were more frustrating to me because I didn't understand them. But once I could kind of name them and and I don't know, there's also this big difference. I find we talk about this frequently too, the difference between when you just read the classic symptoms, but then you hear someone describe it in context of a real life situation or a way that it presented in their life. And you're like, oh, well, that doesn't sound like me, but that's exactly me. Right. And so I think a big part of it for me was being able to not just reframe them, but also kind of by exposing them, by having light on them rather than them being hidden in the shadows. I was more comfortable dealing with them because I could say, oh, okay, here's what's going on. I'm reacting this way because this is what I'm used to, but I'm also used to feeding that narrative and I don't have to.
right, exactly. And you're right, those narratives they get kind of almost hardwired in. I've done groups for CHAD for quite some long, success clinics for close to 25 years, practically since I was diagnosed. And I remember very clearly one woman, probably 10 or 15 years ago, she said, I cannot get places on time. I just can't do it. It's never going to happen. The world's going to have to adjust, right? I am not the person who's ever going to get places on time. Well, unfortunately, the world doesn't adjust, right? The world will decide you're a person that doesn't care enough to get there on time or whatever they want to think, and that's not your responsibility. But whether you get there on time, I don't care how bad your time blindness is or anything else. There are technological ways to deal with it. There are accountability partners. There are all kinds of ways to get somewhere on time.
Yeah.
Might not be able to get to the meeting on time, you think, but if your child was at that location and broke her wrist, you'd get there. Right? So you can do it. It's a matter of reframing the way you think about it. And if you think the way I reframe getting somewhere on time, and I don't really have too much of a problem in that area, so it's a little unfair, but I said to myself, 5 minutes early is on time. That gave me a 5-minute cushion. If something went wrong, too much traffic, I forgot something, I had 5 minutes to make up for it. The way I convinced myself that 5 minutes was on time was that I would go to meetings and in rooms where a lot of chairs and things. I did not want to be disturbing the speaker. I didn't want to be climbing over people. I am kind of like a lot of us, we're very socially responsible creatures. That's a facet of ADHD. We are very socially responsible. So it might not have worked if I just said, I want to get there on time for myself, but it worked very well when I reframed it and I said, you know what, I want to get there on time for the other people. Right. They're counting on me to be there. And so that's easier for me to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because the part about time blindness is I think when you don't have that accountability and you're kind of hitting the mental snooze, you don't realize how 30, 45 minutes, an hour can go, and then you really can be significantly late. But you have to, I'm an always need to be there early kind of person. I think that was kind of instilled in me often, was like kind of the same thing. Like you don't want to be coming in the middle and you want to be there on time. And so I start to find myself getting stressed and actually realizing okay, part of the challenge for me has been in reframing when I start to feel that rigidity of my ADHD kicking in, where the resistance okay, well, suddenly something has changed. It's out of your control, but I'm still hanging on to what I was planning on. And that plan felt very concrete and needed to keep the day going. So when it falls apart, it's like suddenly a little bit of a jockeying. So I've always been that's been a big area for me of growth, is like giving myself that, okay, I don't have to, things did change. It's not what you were planning, got to roll with it.
Yeah. A couple of points come up for me on that, and then I'm going to jump into something else. But first of all, the idea that we have to, that's something we need to reframe as well. I don't have to go to work, right? I have a job, it pays me a paycheck. I don't have to go. If I think to myself, oh my God, it's Monday. I have to go back to that job. It's horrible. I don't like it. I have to do it. Well, it's incorrect. It's poor thinking. It turns you into a victim of you have to do it because something outside. You don't have to go to work. You could live under a bridge, right? There are social programs that'll make sure that you have some food and that sort of thing. You don't have to go to work. So you reframe it and say, I actually choose to go to work. I'm choosing to go to work because I want to go to work. I want to go to work so I can live in a nice place. I want to go to work so I can find meaning and purpose in the work. I want a stable life. I want to be a good partner for my significant other. I like the people I work with. I learn new things. I feel competent. I feel needed. We need to reframe something like I have to go to work out of the nobody likes to be told what to do into the I want to go to work. And okay, there's some things I don't like about this job. Maybe I don't like the people. Maybe I don't find meaning and purpose. So I will go to work. So I have all those other things. And then I'll achieve some other certifications and some other qualifications. And I will go interview at another place where I think I'll be a better fit. We can choose all of those things as opposed to almost pretending like we don't have a choice, right? It's a mindset. And that mindset difference makes all the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very important.
There was a comment in the chat. Andrea had it. I thought it was important, and I want to just discuss it because to me, there is a big difference, and I think she's right. She said, I think it's not quite as simple as that, especially for abuse survivors, as our inner representation, deep-seated learnings there, in some undoing that needs to be engaged in. And I would say, that's absolutely right. And I guess maybe, and Rick, I would love to hear your thoughts, but I mean, from the way that I am currently tackling this, it's kind of like the big emotional things that I'm really trying to work through are the things that I'm in therapy about. And then some of the reframing skills and some of the day-to-day are just more of what I'm trying to incorporate in my daily thinking as I challenge myself to understand myself better, right? Because that's really what, for me, this has been. That reframing is I realize I'm the same person. I just have a deeper understanding of why I'm behaving a certain way, and then I can actually choose to disengage from it. But I'm interested. I'd love to hear your thoughts because I do. I mean, she's absolutely right. It's not the same thing.
I have a whole cascade of thoughts on that because and all this stuff, it really is personal and it goes deep inside of us. And we all live in a slightly different matrix, right? We all have different friends, different experiences, different capabilities. We're all different in that respect. First of all, I will say that it's my very clear belief, and I came across this very early after I was diagnosed because it was, we learn these things. Late diagnosed adults are almost all dealing with some kind of trauma. It's impossible not to have been traumatized by trying to fit your square peg in a round hole your entire childhood. You don't fit in, there's all these kind of things. And then and that's bad enough, but then we're very easily marginalized. We are, predators choose their victims not from the center of the herd, right? They choose from they choose them from the marginalized, right? The weaker, the slower, whatever happens to be, if you think of it as, nature, which it is. So a significant number of people with ADHD not only dealt with the trauma of, square peg, round hole, why am I being sent to the principal's office all the time? Why am I being yelled at? Why am I being told to go sit in the corner? Not only are they dealing with that, but significant number of people have actually been, accosted or had a problem with the predator of one sort or another. And that those things last a lifetime too. And what I think it was your words, the undoing of it, it takes a long time. Mm-hmm. I know, for myself, there were things and it took a really long time. And forgiveness was one of the bigger things. And I think that might have come from Viktor Frankl too. It's one of the most profound books I read earlier in life before I was diagnosed. This idea that we forgive others for their perpetrations, what they did, but we also need to forgive ourselves. It wasn't our fault, right? So one thing I really liked about what Viktor Frankl wrote, and it really stuck with me, and that is there are victims and there are perpetrators, right? In a sense, and I don't want this to be triggering for anybody, but in a sense, it's better to be the victim than the perpetrator. A victim leaves the situation with clean hands, right? They didn't do anything, right? So they get to move on. The perpetrator damages themselves. They live with that guilt and shame the rest of their life, right? Obviously, if they need to shield themselves from that, they numb themselves out. They kind of become more sociopathic and callous, right? So that those things happen, but they're damaging themselves. They're not living a full life. So I'm not saying it's great to be a victim. In fact, his whole talk is turning yourself away from being a victim and taking control of your life. But if you have been victimized by certain things, realize you didn't do it. Somebody else did it. You have clean hands. I think that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, Danielle just mentioned, or I mean, Andrea said, she wants to stand up for deeper than cognitive wiring, which requires a lot of work to access and change. It's not as simple as just changing the narrative. You still need to decide you want to be different, do better in the world, relate to others better, but it does take a lot of work. Right. And then, Danielle said, in some cases, the perpetrator, they just don't care.
That's right.
And that does have an emotional impact on the victims, which I think, anybody that's been the victim of something, especially abuse, it's horrific. You can't really, there's no well of empathy that I can ever show that really shows you that I understand it. But I have, an immense amount of care for anyone that's had to go through that and then try to rebuild around it, because it is hard and it is not easy. And oftentimes, people around you struggle with how to engage you in it, because everything comes across as just like, hey, pat on the back, you feel better. And
so I agree that is part of being a perpetrator, is that you numb yourself out, you become callous, you become, and some people are just maybe born that way. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist, but people who do bad things, they don't want to look in the mirror and see someone who's a bad person, right? So they do numb themselves out, and it may come across that they don't care, and so at some level, but a deeper level, and this came out of Viktor Frankl's work, and he was a concentration camp victim. So he, at a deeper level, one reason they don't care is because they've damaged themselves. Caring is a human condition. So not caring means something's been damaged inside of you. And let's not lose sight of what the goal is. The goal is not to take that perpetrator and rehabilitate them, right? And frankly, I've had things in my life, and I don't care what, so I don't care what happens to them anymore. Maybe that's my own damage, but I care about what I do, right? And so it's better for me to reframe this and say, you know what, I didn't do this, right? Maybe they care, maybe they don't. I don't know. I'm pretty positive that they've damaged themselves, but I am only damaged to the point that, let's make this in a less triggering place. If someone breaks into your house and steals some stuff, right, that's the damage, right? And you can choose to be violated and all that. You will feel that at first, but you can choose to move on from that and say, well, I'm not the thief, right? I didn't do that. I have to buy some new stuff. There's a cost to me, but I don't need to carry that forward the rest of my life. The thief does. Whether they become so callous they don't hardly feel it, I don't know. But there's a whole range of things on that side, but I don't really care what happens to them. We can move on from those things. And
it's a great point.
Yeah. So there's no doubt to me. It's really about where we go, right? This whole thing is about taking control of your life, not worrying about what someone else did or didn't do and all those things. So I want to talk about this problem with the label of ADHD. We're not operating at a deficit. That's really clear to me. If that was the case, 20-25% of the CEOs in this country, look at the people that work in the police departments, the fire departments, the EMTs, they're not operating at a deficit. They're the people who run into burning buildings, right? They're the ones that save us, not operating at a deficit. They might be in a deficit in certain situations, but then again, someone who's never had a bad hair day is going to be operating at a deficit when there's a bomb blowing up in the building, right? They're going to panic and not know what to do, right? So it's different strengths that we have. We're not disordered. No idea why that got into the label. And we're not suffering from a lifelong pathology. The symptoms of ADHD are situational. And I think that's incredibly important. They're not psychiatric. We have a neurological brain function difference. It manifests depending on the situation we're in. I've done both of these two things in my life. You know, in my earlier days, I drove a taxi when I came home from my undergraduate work. My sister and brother-in-law, they had a small taxi company, so I drove a taxi. And when I got out of undergraduate, I went into law school, which was a huge mistake for me. I'll cover that in a minute. But the fact is, I'm the same person in both of those environments. When I'd go drive a taxi on the weekend, I was happy as in a clam. I loved it. People would get into my car. I'd make them sit in the front seat. I'd have a conversation for a few minutes. I'd learn something maybe. I'd ask what they were all about. You know, I'd love to interview people in a way, and I guess I always have. So it was a lot of fun. And I was also trying to get through law school. Tons of books, which I'm a slow reader, and I can't sit in the chair long enough to read anyway. And it was the days before audiobooks, which leveled the playing field, by the way. We talk about equity. Giving someone a book in a chair it may be equal, but it's not equitable, right? People with ADHD can't sit in that chair, so it's not fair to them. So it's not equitable, even though everybody got a book, everybody got a chair. So, but yeah, struggling through that, you know, and I did have that early awareness. I said, you know, you don't even like school. Why are you here? Why did you some script you were running from your parents that said, hey, you get out of undergraduate, you go to graduate school, you do something. That wasn't me. And we have to learn how to be ourselves and who we are. Not that I don't value education. I absolutely do. But sitting in a chair to read books all the time so that I could get a job in a windowless office doing more paperwork for the rest of my life, that would have been a mistake, right? Because I'm not that person.
Right.
So I think we need to realize symptoms of ADHD are entirely situational, almost entirely situational. They will pop up and cause you problems in one area. They'll pop up and be really your asset in other areas. I kind of joke about it, but it's such a good metaphor or whatever that really people understand it. So if I'm in a 10-story building, I'm on the 10th floor, and something really bad happens on the 7th floor, there's a bomb that goes off, and it's a huge problem because I'm up above, I can't get out, right? If I'm in that situation, I want to be with other people with ADHD because we will all calm down in a crisis. We won't panic. We were used to crises because we've created so many ourselves, right? We're used to it. We know that this is a problem. We'll figure it out. But if I'm in a room full of people who've never had a bad hair day, who don't have ADHD, their brains will panic and go into, you know, they'll be short-circuited. They'll be paralyzed. I don't want to be in that room because now I'm basically the only person who is paying attention and can do something. I want to be in a room full of people who our brains, in some ways, this is where medication comes in. Our brains are asleep a lot of the time, and it takes a crisis. It takes something happening to wake that brain up. And if you think about the person whose brain is always woken up, then when the crisis comes along, sometimes it's just short circuits them. It's an overload for them. Not always by any means, but so.
No, I think that's relatable to me too. I think, you know, when I was in college, I was actually, as I was like approaching the workforce, this was the early 90s, people kept telling me, they're like, you're too broad. You're trying to do too much. And I kept saying, but like, you know, that's what I'm drawn to. Like, I like all these different pieces. And that's kind of continued in my career. As I've never tried to be a specialist other than in my overall field, but I've never like said, oh, I'm an email marketer, or I'm a search marketer, or I'm a social marketer. And so, and people are often like, you know, well, you know, it seems like you just are kind of used to this, like hectic, everything changes every day. And I'd always use the analogy, well, I can't really complain about fire if I'm a firefighter, right? Because that's my day. So yeah. And I think I'm realizing now part of why I was drawn to this kind of like role and even being an entrepreneur early in my career was because of that ongoing risk assessment, analysis, decision making, all these different things that were happening that kept me stimulated without, you know, knowing what was really going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's really where I'm going with that. Since the symptoms or the manifestations of ADHD are situational. It's pretty much incumbent upon us to put ourselves in the right situations and to avoid the situations that aren't going to work out very well, or figure out how to, mitigate those things. There's some things we can't possibly avoid, so we have to learn ways to perform at our best within that. The world has structure, right? We have to fit within it. I would never advocate that we just completely go our own way and ignore the world, because it won't work out very well for us. But if we pay attention to what's going on, then we can find the best place for us to fit.
Yeah, but your point about the strengths and weaknesses, it is interesting. I have been in that part where my ADHD took me into a job, and this is a personal experience too, where I've kind of come in and out of entrepreneurial roles and then gone into very large organizations. And my experience at very large organizations is I tend to make a really big impact fast, because I can kind of figure things out way faster than others. And I'm like, oh, here's how we're going to navigate this. But then that same early success then kind of sets me up, especially not knowing I had ADHD, set me up to be in these weird power vacuums where suddenly it was like I'm outshining leadership or people around me, and I really shouldn't be. And I'm kind of leading the business in ways that I really don't have authority to do, but yet this is where it's all kind of going, and I'm showing a path for how to get there. And I didn't understand why I was struggling so much, or why I couldn't keep that momentum up, but I really have a much better understanding now. It was like I was asking too much, right? It wasn't my ship to steer at that point. And so where I could be successful in the short term, for it to be ongoing would have really required the whole thing to have changed around. And that just wasn't happening.
Yeah. I frequently cite that, and I'm still looking for the study. I did read it at one point, that 20 to 25% of us are CEOs. And that includes all the other, chief roles in companies as well. There's a reason for it. It's not an accident. There's a reason that we, first of all, sometimes have a hard time climbing the corporate ladder, right? We're in the mailroom, can't figure out how to get to the top. We can't navigate all that other stuff because we don't always do what we're told. We don't always show up on time. We don't always do things the way we're expected to do it. So we have a hard time climbing that ladder. I believe that's also one of the strengths of ADHD, is we're very creative. There are various studies out there that show we are, and then the other ones that show that we're pretty much like everybody else. But the reason, whether we're more creative or not, the reason we come off as more creative is because we're less afraid of trying things that are different, right?
Yeah.
The fear kills creativity, right? It just kills creativity. And we don't have that fear, partly because we're oblivious to the possible consequences, which gets us in trouble, right?
Right.
But we can be very creative, and maybe 100 people have these really creative out-of-the-box ideas, and maybe 95 of them don't work, right? We have to learn that. But the 5% that do, I'm absolutely convinced. If you think of populations on a bell curve, there's the center of the bell curve. Those are the normals, right? And then there's people on both sides. These people are, one side and there's the other. Humanity, society is propelled forward by the people on the margins. It is not the people on the center of the bell curve, right? Those are not the people. They are the, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Tom Hartman talks about farmers and hunters, right? There's nothing wrong with being a farmer, nothing wrong with being a hunter. But in our society, hunters are on the edges of the bell curve, right? In a way, hunters were the ones that saw the rustling in the bushes before anybody else did. They were the ones that, found the game or protected the tribe. They literally were the protectors at one point. Center of the bell curve people, they're back, in the village, and they're farming, right? They're making sure that everything works on a consistent basis. We're anything but consistent. So that's another reason why I think we do better, in our own businesses. A tremendous number of people, not just CEOs, but people are in business for themselves. I hear, coaches and contractors and all kinds of people that are doing things on their own because they don't really feel like they fit within a structured environment. And what they discover is you have to be structured in order to be in business for yourself.
You mentioned something that really resonates with me, and I talked about this several times with others about people's fear of of sharing an idea or taking that risk. And I do think, I mean, I know a number of people with small business that if I think back, like probably a good majority of them have ADHD.
No
And
doubt.
it's partly like, I think part of, again, to your point about it being a deficit and a disorder, I've always seen it as I have a dearth of ideas. I mean, so my ability to assess opportunities, sometimes it is like I can run what feels like a supercomputer's worth of ideas through okay, well, that is a good idea. I could do something there. And I think oftentimes the normal people often end up asking themselves, why am I not advancing? And they're not taking that risk on themselves. And I think maybe there's a blinder that people with ADHD have where it's just like they'll blurt out an idea. I didn't realize one of the reasons I interrupted conversation so often, it wasn't because of arrogance. It was ADHD. I mean, I'm trying to, and I'm really like trying to stop that about myself because I know it's a horrible trait in a social setting.
Right.
It works well in, some settings when I'm public speaking, but.
Exactly. And to that end, we need to figure out where these things don't work for us and where they do. If public speaking is a strong point, then maybe that should be one of your bucket list qualifiers for whatever your career is going to be. But we are very inconsistent. Another thing that I'm convinced has us working for ourselves in a way, and when I say working for ourselves, I always kind of trip up on that because if you're in business for yourself, you're actually working for everybody else. You're working for every client that you have, right? They're not working for you, right? You're working for them. So I think one of the things is we get super passionate. We find something, a dog with a bone, right? We find something that we're passionate about and we won't let it go. And that's a problem too, if you're trying to climb the corporate ladder, because they say, yeah, it was really great that you're excited about this, but what about these other three things that we were actually your job? Why didn't you do those? So if you're in business for yourself, you can be super passionate about something and figure out how to delegate those other three things because they have to be done, right? One way or another, or maybe you can find a creative way to do it. I'm just curious by a show of hands in the chat window, how many of you are self-employed or in business for yourself? I suspect it's a pretty high number.
Yeah, I've had a few people that have mentioned it in the chat.
Yeah, and then
Gail.
Yeah. How do we do that? I'm not sure how to do that.
People are raising their hand on the attendees on the side, and then.
So how do we let her talk?
Or Danielle, let's see. I don't know if we can. Patricia, we've got at least 4 or 5.
You can put your questions in the chat window. Keith and Claudia will see them. Yep, self-employed, unself-employed. Yeah. It's just natural that we would gravitate in that direction, and it's more than the general population. Yeah, tried my own.
Yeah, business. And Elise said in the chat, this is interesting. She said, it was talking about kind of those when random situations break out. She said, love that illustration. One day at my workplace, the power went out for most of the day. We had to continue working in the dark. A lot of people were stressed. Oddly, I was not. I felt calmer and happier than normal. Yeah. I had the sense that my brain is always on the alert and prepared for anything out of the ordinary, whereas normal situations are what stress me.
Yeah, and there's the science behind that. Literally, metaphorically a little bit, but literally our brain is asleep when there's nothing going on. And there's never some movie quote, but there's never nothing going on, right? But we may be feeling like things are just calm, it's boring, it's tedious. I have to sit here the rest of the day and do some report. But when something happens, it wakes our brain up. It puts people who are already awake on overload. It puts us into a really good zone. So it's one of the things medication does. Medication will help you be in that zone more of the time with less crisis going on. We don't want to live our lives in crisis, right? Crisis,
true.
We thrive with it sometimes, but we don't want to be. We need to find a more stable way to be. Yep. So, if there are more questions you can pick out of the chat.
Yeah, let's see. I was there's a number of people are saying they're self-employed. Amanda saying, I'm still a college student and plan to open my own therapy practice in the future. You know, it was really interesting. We were at a high school event a few weeks ago, and the homecoming court was all announcing what they were going to be doing in the future. So there are, you know, like 20 students up there. And I think at least 6 of them said they were planning to go into psychology and study mental health. And I was like, what a time where, I mean, I can't even imagine growing up in the 80s and 90s and you know, I mean, even then, mental health, a therapist, that was for the person that was deeply broken, or that was, you know what I mean? Like it just, or it was Frasier. It was kind of the joke of the kind of the thing that the elite had as their, you know, social whatever. I don't know, but
There's some of that.
I'm very glad that we're at this point now where I think the younger generation, especially, they're very open, and I think we'll be interested to see where that leads. But they're very open about their mental health. They're very open about their challenges. I think the biggest worry I have in all of this, and this is again part of how we're trying to reframe it, is we want to do things like this so that there are open dialogues and conversations, and people can talk about, should we reframe how we label ADHD to accentuate more of the positives, because these are the things that are going to propel the conversation forward. Because we still get the, you know, people think ADHD, especially when, you know, you mention ADHD in a child, one of the first negative reactions is you're just saying you want to get a kid hooked on drugs. And that to me, I mean, we continue with that. We get those kind of drive-by comments nearly every day through our social channels. And to me, that's the opportunity again to educate that person, to help them understand the gap in knowledge.
Yeah, I want to get to some of these reframes because that's what we're on. But I will say that that's a big issue. Ignorance dies really hard. There's a concept, you know, called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's incredibly powerful, and we're all subject to it. I'm not trying to weaponize it or anything. People that know very little about a particular subject, we think we know a lot about it, right? And we have no idea how incompetent we are. And when you get people that say you're just trying to get a kid hooked on drugs, and you can already tell by the language. If they call it drugs, they're on one side. If they call it medication, it's another, right? You can tell by the language they're using, but they're kind of clueless. And it's somehow we have to get through to that. The fact is, if you give a kid that needs proper medication, if you give that kid proper medication, they're far less likely to be hooked on drugs. They're far less likely to self-medicate and do all kinds of risky behavior and have car accidents and all those different things that happen. It's just ignorance, but ignorance dies hard. It's really hard to get it out of there.
So, all right, well, that your setup was perfect. Let's run through the things that are going to help us reframe it.
Yeah. So I think, there's an undeniable aspect that ADHD is a very powerful aspect of our brain, right? When and several people mentioned it in chat, when something comes up, it's maybe a crisis, maybe it's something we're really passionate about, we can just dive into it, and we have a lot of resources we bring to bear on it. So I think it's some of the best traits I've seen from people with ADHD is how powerful they can be in the chosen area, the chosen field that they want to be. And then that's not just work. It can also be being a good partner to your significant other. We have a lot of drive. We have a really hard time accessing that drive if we aren't interested or passionate, if it's tedious and dull, right? Well, like everybody does, but it's worse for us. But when something is fascinating and maybe more important, go all the way back to Viktor Frankl, when there's meaning and purpose to it, we have an incredible amount of drive to do that. And in that growing up, we've faced a lot of these things came out of ADHD, our experience, and not actually directly ADHD. They came out of it, just like depression, anxiety, they grow out of it. If you have ADHD, it doesn't mean you're depressed. But if you have ADHD and it's not remediated, you may get depressed, right? Same kind of thing with these different skills. One reason that so many of us are good crisis managers is because we have so much experience managing crises, right? Because we're in them all the time. Another reason that we have a lot of empathy and compassion for other people is because we've been harmed ourselves, and we say, you know, I can feel that, right? I can feel the look on someone else's face, right? So
Mhm.
we read subtext really well. I'm not saying everybody, some people are oblivious, some, whatever,
Yeah.
but a lot of people with ADHD, they're incredibly empathetic, which means they're
Yeah.
going to make really good coaches and really good therapists and psychiatrists, the whole range. So there's so many aspects of what is powerful about us that come out of the experience of living, this kind of marginalized kind of existence in a way. And when I say marginalized, I don't mean bad. I mean, we're on the edges of the bell curve, right?
Right.
Like we said earlier, the people who change the world are on the edge of the bell curve usually.
Yeah.
Resilience is another one of those things we develop. I mean, if you get buffeted around enough, you get tough, right? And you learn to stand up for yourself. And we learn that we can handle disappointments and embarrassments. And we've all known people where life has been perfect for them. They grew up in upper middle class suburb and they went to school and they got their job and all that stuff worked out. And then something happens in a negative way. They can't handle it because they haven't been toughened up, so to speak. That's probably a better way to frame that. But people with ADHD, they've been buffeted around all over the place. And this is just another little bump in the road and they just keep right on going. They're quite resilient. I think that's a really important point for it. I believe that we, again, not everybody, but we can have incredibly good soft skills, right? You mentioned that public speaking is an area for you. Well, I read this, I don't know if it's urban legend or not, but I read this like 40 years ago, that public speaking was the #1 terrifying fear that Americans had. Now, I don't know if that was hyperbole, but I know myself, I was terrified to speak in front of groups and stuff to the point where I wouldn't do it, right? I just, oh, I don't need to do that. But we're very much people, and if we can be that people person, then we develop our soft skills and we get better at public speaking and all these different things happen. The sales field is filled with people with ADHD. First of all, no one's actually telling them what to do in most cases. They say, hey, here's your desk, here's the phone, go out and sell some stuff, right? That's about all the training that a lot of salespeople get. So they got to figure it out. And they're really good people. They can see the need that someone has and say, yep, you don't need my product. I'm out of here and go talk to someone else. Or, yep, you do need it. I'm going to explain it to you until you buy it, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah. And, I was fortunate. I was involved in speech and debate in high school, but I reached a point where, I was playing baseball as well and kind of just reached a point where I was kind of academically at a point where I was like, I know I'm about as far as I'm going to go with sports. I was good at it. I enjoyed it, but debate just really lit something in my brain. And now I really understand why, because I was constantly having to learn and challenge and think on the fly. But it gave me a framework to present ideas that I, often said, like, speech and debate was one of the things that has helped me the most. And I understand it even deeper now that I've been diagnosed, because I understand it actually helped give me a framework to kind of repeat it. And once I got the confidence to do it, I knew how to do it. So then it was just, okay, I can just do that with this topic and do that with this topic. So, but it is, I know others in my life that are petrified of speaking. And the thought of it is just too much. And again, I often tell people, you just have to kind of get to that point. It's a lot like reframing it. One of our speech coaches said, when you're in a room of people, you can either be looking at the faces where you don't have control, or you can look at the top of everyone's head and above where you do. And the funny thing is, they're still going to think you're looking at them if you're looking at the top of their head. Yeah. And so you have control in that space. And that feels, when I've told people that before, they're like, wow, I've never really thought about that. So, because as soon as you look at someone, you lose your frame of reference. You get caught up in, why are they on their phone? Why did they frown? Whatever it might be.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you where that changed for me. I had heard that those other things didn't really work for me, but I think at some point in my life, there was a gestalt shift in some sense. It used to be when I was up on, stage or whatever, talking to a few people, right, in a group, it was my ego showed up, right? What are they thinking about me? What is this material? Are they laughing about it? Whatever it is, it was all about me and what I thought they were thinking about me, and that was a petrifying place to be. What happened later, and this literally was a gestalt shift. I said, this has nothing to do with me. these people want me here to talk about some particular thing. It's nothing to do with me, right?
Mhm.
It's how am I going to convey this information that I think is valuable to them, right? And so, unless my ego shows up, I have no reason to get nervous because I'm not even here.
Right.
I'm
Right.
I'm just a vehicle conveying information that I have. It's the same as my sales career.
That's a great way to think of it.
The same as my sales career. I used to, a lot of salespeople, they go out because they got to hit a quota. They want to sell, whatever it is. My goal was to say, you know what, first identify whether this person needs what I have or not, which happened to be real estate, right? Find out if they need it. And if they don't need it, it's okay. Just go somewhere else. There's 8 billion people on the planet, right? I don't need to keep badgering somebody. But if I discover they really they had a problem because their apartment building was upside down cash flow wise, and they had a big problem, then they actually needed me. And then it turned around to my greatest fear was I wouldn't do a good enough job of explaining to them why I was the right person for them to do the work. It was not about I need a commission. It was about I'm the right person for them. I'm not doing my job if I don't explain that properly to them. So it turns it around in his head. And I think it's one reason that people can be really good salespeople that have ADHD is because we read subtext really well a lot of times. We can read the expression on someone's face. And this has been shown, we can read it better than the neurotypical, at least in the area that we're familiar with, right?
Yeah.
I think
so
that
we had a question, and I don't know, I mean, this may be a separate topic. Stacy's asking, how does marijuana affect a person with ADHD? Is it helpful? I understand this isn't the topic, but I wanted to ask what people's experience might have been. And I've heard it as one of the things people have used, like alcohol, kind of before they knew what was going on, before they were diagnosed.
Yeah. I'm not,
but
I'd be out of my lane on that. But I do believe, like you said, it comes under self-medication. And what has been proven over and over again, without a doubt, and we are different, so it's just a bell curve again. But what works in the treatment of ADHD is, first of all, getting a proper diagnosis to rule out and rule in morbidities like anxiety and depressive issues and bipolar 2. There's a whole bunch of things like that. So you want a full diagnosis, which includes a physical to rule out sleep apnea and these different things, and then take that seriously, because if ADHD is messing up your life, I would suggest we take it seriously. And I know so many people who don't, right? They read a book and they're done. They think they know it all. That's the Dunning-Kruger part, right? We learn a little bit and we think we're done. Once you have that diagnosis, then mainstream medications, 80% of people respond well to mainstream medications. There's all kinds of alternatives, and I would put cannabis in the alternative. And I'm a child of the late 60s and 70s. Believe me, I have all kinds of things have been in my system. I put that in the area of alternative treatments. So mainstream medications, that seems to work. A lot of people are so anti-pharmacy that they can't see the fact that these medications actually work.
Right.
And then behavioral modification therapy is a really important thing. And then lastly, creating an ADHD-friendly living environment for yourself. Those 4 things are what are proven to work. There's nothing wrong with, changing your diet and all these different things that people talk about. But the stuff that's proven to work, I mean, if it's really damaging your life and it's caused all kinds of problems and people don't go get a diagnosis because everything's perfect, right? There's something going wrong that they don't like. If it's serious, do those 4 steps, right? Your life can be so much better. My life was a mess when I went finally to get my diagnosis. It was a roller coaster ride before that. It really wasn't a mess, but it was a roller coaster ride. But it ended up being a mess because of the way I was operating in the world. And I don't know, maybe it's the right people that I fell in with as far as coaches and people like that. But
well, and I think, I tell people this all the time. And, after I was diagnosed, it was a few months before I decided to start taking a stimulant, under a doctor's advice. And I did, I had a lot of thoughts about it. And prior to taking it, I often told people I believed that it wouldn't have, it's not like some magic key that suddenly you start taking the stimulant and you're cured of your ADHD. And that's been my experience now that I've started it. But it has, I mean, my ability, I guess, to not get caught up in my own way and to ruminate on something or stop myself from doing something, that has definitely gotten better. But I still have to do all the work. I mean, it's not like suddenly I got a fast pass to, wow, life is just easier now that I have this prescription. I mean, so cannabis, any other type, I mean, those alternatives, everything else, it's really just part of like symptom management, but there's still a lot. I mean, if you're trying to make a positive change in your life or change the way you approach something, there is a lot of work you have to put in. It's not
It's
just going to happen.
It's all work.
Yeah.
I believe the medication can make the work a little bit easier. That's all it does. And if you
Yeah,
don't
right.
do anything, I've heard this story so many times. People take medication, oh, my life's different, and then they say, oh, this is what it's like to feel normal. They don't know that. If they've never felt normal, you don't know what normal feels like. So right off the top, I'm saying, okay, this is a story going on. This is weird. So it's not what's actually happening. But when people take medication and they do start functioning and focusing and calming and all that, if they don't do the behavioral modification work, if they don't change their living environment, if they don't do the work it takes to change that, their mind will bring them back to the set point they were at. We all operate in set points, right? We have set points. It's an equilibrium in our life. And we're where we are because of everything that's happening in our life, the people in it, the decisions, all the different things. Medication can push you out into another place, which you might rather be, but you've got this entire matrix of your mind dragging you back, and it will overcome the medication at some point if you don't do the work. I think it's absolutely crucial. And someone else said in the, just a host and panelist, so I'll just say it so everybody hears it, but cannabis helps with my anxiety, but not using it now because she's starting, I lost the comment, but starting some medication like
Strattera, yeah.
Yeah. So I would agree with that too. I think it's important. That's why I always harp on sleep, diet, and exercise, right? Get your baseline. If you start taking medication and you're sleep deprived, it's probably not going to help you. It's not, it may help, but it may actually be worse. So get sleep, diet, and exercise under control so you have a baseline, doing the hard work to change your behavioral patterns. And they are often lifelong. They're hardwired in almost, right? I would say from a psychological perspective, things that are hardwired generally happen to us, before we were 2 years old, somewhere in there. But the rest of it can feel hardwired in because it's such a well-worn neural pathway. It's really hard to start changing that. And people do get frustrated with that. It is hard work. Danielle, what was that? She put in reframe.
She said, I reframed hard work when relating to changing my behaviors to conscious effort.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a great way to put it.
So I think we're a little out of time, but this is a metaphor I think is really useful. I do a lot of hiking. If I'm hiking on a single track trail through the grassland, through the trees, it is well worn. There's no weeds on it. There's nothing going on. I can walk on that pathway very easily. If I want to choose another path, then I have to do some hard work. I have to walk through the weeds. I have to pick my own direction. There's bugs and snakes and all kinds of things out there for me to worry about. And that well-worn path is always there. So when I try the hard path, the new path, the other path is going to tempt me, and I'm going to have to put in some things in place so that I have accountability partners and whatever it happens to be to help keep me from going down that other path. If we take the new path, which is our chosen path, long enough, it will become the new neural pathway that is the natural way for us to do. We won't have to think about it much anymore. And the old path, the old way that we wanted to let go of, will finally have been grown over, and it'll be a natural, full of weeds area. So we won't necessarily go there. As a matter of fact, we may actually look back and say, why in the world did I always do that? I have no idea why I always had that behavior pattern. But it may make perfect sense to us right now. So to shift it, it is hard. It's hard. It takes time. It's challenging. Let me just give just a couple more of these really super quick.
Sure.
I think we have a strong sense of fairness because we feel like we've been treated unjustly, and so we've sensitized. And when we see that happening with someone, a lot of the stuff is because of the way we were brought up. We have a willingness to take risk. Tom Hartman, the Edison Gene is one of his books, and there was another one which even better. The title escapes me right now. But it's a really good way of framing this. It's not linear versus non-linear. There's no pejorative, saying they're not as good as us or anything like that. No, the world takes all kinds, and we happen to be one of those kinds. We see things on the periphery. We're not afraid to act in the face of risk. As a matter of fact, sometimes that risk, we see it, we see the value. Okay, this is my own opinion, but I think one reason we're not afraid of risk, even when we see it, is because we have a higher purpose involved, and it comes from a lot of the struggles that we've had. We see that, hey, this is risky. If I have to run across the room to get the fire extinguisher, it might be risky. I might fall, I might break my ankle, I might get tripped up, and everybody else is leaving. I could be left behind. But we see a higher purpose. Hey, if I do that, I could put this fire out, right, type thing. So I think it's really important, because it's what we do. We can be very spontaneous. My ex-wife at this point, she had 4 kids, but she often used to say she thought she had 5 kids in the house, right? Because I was like one of them, right? I had certain things I took responsibility for, but there are other things where I was more childlike. I actually think that's really good. We can be spontaneous. A lot of the people I know, I won't name names of celebrities, but because not documented, but we have a great sense of humor, right? Again, that's developed over a period of time. The humor can be a defense tactic when we're growing up, and it feels good because we get positive attention from people.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things. Engaging conversation skills, compassion, I think I mentioned, persistence. There's a lot of these things. We just need to reframe this idea that somehow we're broken and damaged, because we're not. We're just different.
I love this. I think there was a comment Stacy just shared. It's a great way to kind of close it out. But she just says, I love this reframing concept. Totally agree. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. These people are needed and need to know their strengths and potential. And I completely agree. I mean, we talk about this all the time. I mean, a number of our patients, a good majority, are working adults. Not, I think when this business was founded, the founders thought it would probably be parents of children with ADHD. And that is a part of our patient mix. But the majority of them are just like you and I, people that were diagnosed later in life, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And I think, there's sometimes you hear about this sense of grief, the what if my life what if I'd known earlier? And I am really having to prescribe to the philosophy that what now, not what if, because yes, I could reframe all the past, but that's just a book I'm going to have to write someday if I really want that fiction, because the truth is I'm here, and that's going to get me further than trying to carry the weight of some imaginary fairy tale that and that's it's not to discount people's dreams, but I've had things that I thought I would be, things that, I imagined in my 20s, whatever. They're not exactly where I thought I would be, but where I'm at, I'm so grateful and I'm so happy. And, to your earlier point, it's kind of weird, but I ended up where I was supposed to be. So I think, and I'm attributing part of that to my ADHD and being able to kind of find those opportunities for myself and realize when it's time to go. So, someone asked real quick, Stacy asked, can you share the 4 steps you mentioned to take in the text, please? I'm trying to remember where that was.
Yeah. And I remember, I'll let you type them. But the first one is an absolutely full diagnosis, a correct full diagnosis. And it doesn't mean an interview for 15 minutes with a psychiatrist. It means a physical to rule out things like sleep apnea. It means evaluating a variety of different things, your history, and there's a lot of subjectivity. So you really need to dig in deep to it. Your psychiatrist or providers need to rule out a lot of things, and also to rule some things in, right? When I got diagnosed, there was an element of bipolar 2 in there. That's part of my issue. And, the guy said I was depressed, and I totally disagreed with him. And I figured out 2 years later that he was probably correct. There was depression in it too, because depression isn't what we, it's not like the movies where the person can't get out of bed. I mean, that is that way for some people, but depression for a lot of people doesn't manifest that way at all. It manifests in this glass wall. Why can't I do this stuff? I know how to do it.
Why do I feel so stuck?
Why am I stuck? Why is this glass wall this stuff is really important. I know how to do it. I have no problem. It's not hard, but I can't do it day after day after day. That's a symptom of depression. It could be other things too. So absolutely clear, full diagnosis, including a physical, and then taking the prescribed ADHD medications that are coming in, and you can have input. You can say, hey, I have bad side effect with that one. Let's try something else. You're kind of the guinea pig, right? It takes a while for them to titrate your medications. But for 80% of us, medications work. They help us. Just like my glasses, I'd rather not wear glasses, right? They have a side effect. I could get it in the face. I could get glass in my eye. But the odds of that happening are slim compared to the odds of my being able to actually read things, right? So I would prefer not to wear glasses, but they help me so much compared to the minor side effects, or the unlikely side effects, I should say. Mainstream medications are the same way. And that's a risk for self-medicating, by the way. You don't know what you're getting, right? And I, my experience with street drugs or whatever comes from the early 70s or something, but you didn't know what you were getting. You had no idea how certain stuff was cut. You didn't have any idea what you were getting. So you're taking a huge risk. I'd rather get my stuff that came out of a pharmaceutical company, whether I don't like the political aspects of that, that's not germane to this particular conversation. If I'm going to take medications that help me the most. And then behavioral modification therapy. We talked about the path going through the grassland. It is not easy. And if you're trying to do it yourself, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, it's can be virtually impossible. So we need to change certain behaviors that we have, and we need help to do that, whether that's a really good chosen friend environment, a better work environment, an actual therapist that you're paying. Groups like ADA and CHAD have these success clinics that they have, and Ren of High has them too. Getting to know a lot of other people who are struggling with the same kind of thing. We learn from each other. We are, as Jim Rohn said, he's a motivational speaker, but he says we are the sum total of the 5 people closest to us, and it's absolutely true. I just told a friend of mine, which I know from Renify from being online, and she's incredibly productive. And I just said it the other day. It hadn't occurred to me before, but I'm so much more productive because she's so much productive. She doesn't tell me what to do at all, but I just say, what is she doing today? Oh, she's probably reading. She's probably teaching. She's probably all these different things she's done, right? She's been on 5 continents talking about her thing that she does, and I'm more productive because it rubs off. It's contagious. It literally is. So make sure we're surrounded by the right people. And when I was first diagnosed, I had to let a number of people that were kind of toxic to me out of my life. I was kind about it, but I just let them slide away, and I replaced them with people that were better healthfully for me. So there's that. And then that bleeds over to an ADHD friendly living environment. That would be the people you surround yourself with, the type of work that you're doing, settling arguments with your significant other and say, yeah, we got a lot of stuff going on, and I'm not going to use my ADHD as an excuse, but we got to do something here because I'm just not the person who should be balancing the checkbook, right? How about you balance the checkbook and I'll do the lawn, right? Let's divide and conquer on the labor here. I'm not so good at certain things, and they stress me out because I know they won't be good and it causes consequences. So an ADHD friendly living environment is, I think, really important. Not that there aren't alternatives. I have nothing against the alternatives for the most part, but do the stuff that's been proven to work if it's important.
Yeah, start there.
Yeah, start there. And then the last thing I would add is make sure that you got your sleep, diet, and exercise under control, especially your sleep. Your sleep will send your ADHD symptoms off the rails. Just 2 nights of poor sleep makes your ADHD symptoms so much worse. Your distractibility, your ability to be proactive meaning in this case, deciding to do something and then actually doing it. We have this huge intention action gap, and lack of sleep just widens that gap to where it's we just can't get across it. So sleep, diet, and exercise. Diet's important. It won't cure your ADHD. That's some book that somebody published. If it cures your ADHD, you had a nutritional deficiency, right? You didn't have ADHD. But that doesn't mean that diet's not important. We need to eat healthfully.
Right.
It's a very simple way to do that, by the way. If you have an agenda, a calendar, and it's printed, you can just write on the side. That's what I did. I just wrote on the side every little thing that I ate during the day. I did that for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. And I just looked at it. I said, this is crap, right? I need to start eating better. I didn't have to force myself to do anything. I just said, this 5 bags of Doritos. So what am I doing there? What am I doing to myself? And I
Right.
have self-respect. We start saying, I don't want to do it. But it starts with self-awareness. What's the other? Sleep, diet, and exercise is crucial. You mentioned being in sports. If I had a kid, actually all 4 of my kids, I really pushed them into sports. I didn't know why, right? But it's huge. It's really good. It keeps your brain oxygenated. It burns off the extra energy. As adults, we need to get out of the chair and get out hiking in the woods. Whatever our capability is, we got to push ourselves a little bit and stay in good shape. And your body's a machine, right?
Yeah.
People think of a lot of different things, but the fact is, it is a biological machine. And if you don't use it, if you don't exercise it, it's not going to work very well. So anyway, those are my soapbox. Sleep, diet, and exercise is absolutely crucial. And I've seen it in my own life, right? I think it's crucial.
Yeah.
Use it or lose it. Yep. That's really true. It's harder to get back. And it's not to say you can't. If you've been living a sedentary life for 45 years or 50 years, it doesn't mean you can't get started and start exercising and using your body in certain ways. It's, in some sense, it's never too late until you're dead. Obviously, if you start earlier and you're consistent, that would be great. But, like I put in the thing, there's a Carolyn Mace quote that I really like. It's "Where to from here?" You can't go from the could have been, would have been, and should have been life that you are grieving for that didn't happen because of the ADHD symptoms partially. You can't go from there. That's history. It's just not there. You can only go from here. You can decide where you're at, decide where you want to go, draw a map and say, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm sedentary, I'm out of shape, I'm 55 years old. I can't change any of that past. What I can do is come up with an exercise regimen now, and maybe get a gym coach, or go get your medical stuff checked out so you don't cause yourself a cardiac event or something. Just take the steps, just making those things work.
Yeah, it's true.
This whole thing about reframing, just to bring it full circle, it's all about taking responsibility for our life. And the more responsibility we take for our life, the happier we are going to be. And I'm not talking about the win the lottery happiness. I'm talking about more profound meaning and purpose happiness in our lives. And if we take responsibility for our lives, we have a chance to achieve those things in a greater measure.
That's a really fantastic point, Rick. I mean, that personal satisfaction is something you just can't replace. You can't buy. And that deep sense when it is real and you've done it, is huge.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, I want to invite people to our, I know we're over time, I think, that the Renify, we're like $20 a month. We're not free. We can't do it that way. We're about as cheap as we know how to make it. But we do have a class starting, I think, for this particular topic, 6 weeks, 12 days, 12 hours of how to get out of this negative thinking that we're talking about and getting into realistic thinking, right? I'm not going from negative to positive. I mean, that positive is positive, I suppose, but realistic is what's most important.
Right.
So get out of the negative, I can't do these things, to, yes, I can. I think it's absolutely huge. And so many people, I've led CHAD and now ADA, support clinics for 25 years with CHAD, and I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years with ADA. I see so many people that are stuck. I think you used that term before. They're stuck.
Yep.
They don't feel like they can do it, and they're like swimming through jello. They can't get traction on things. Part of that is this internal framing that we have that is telling us that we're disordered and deficited, and we need to get away from that. We need to reframe it. And that idea that we're the sum total of the 5 people around us, that's absolutely crucial. Motivation is contagious. When you see people around you doing stuff, you're more likely to do stuff. If you see the people around you flailing and failing, then that's going to rub off on you, right? So,
right.
I don't know, if you're in business, surround yourself with successful people, right? And if you're looking in your personal environment, surround yourself with people who make you feel good and will support you in ways, not people that say, hey, it's okay that you're always late. I'd rather have someone around me that said, hey, I see you were late the last 2 times. What can I do to help you? We need to surround ourselves with the right people.
Yeah, that accountability really does go a long way.
Yeah, and the 6-week course there, Stacy, is not therapy, because we're not therapists, but I would actually say that it pretty much is. I mean, I think the whole idea of being in a community like we're putting together at Renify is therapeutic. You're with other people who are taking the steps to make their lives better, right? We're all struggling with something, right? Everybody has something going on that they don't understand how to deal with. Everybody's got that, but they're the proactive people that are taking steps to do something about it. So yeah, in a way, I'll have to say it's therapeutic. It's not therapy because we're not therapists, but it's therapeutic. Yeah, therapy. Right. I do have a psychology background. The therapy, as Keith said earlier, it has a negative stigma connotation to it. It's really unfortunate because therapy is good for us. Medication is good for us. Glasses are good. All these things are good for us, and we need to let go of the negative characterizations that other people have put on them.
So Julie asked real quick in the chat, will the recording be available? It will. We'll definitely make this available on our website. It usually takes us a few days after. And then Andrea was, or Julie, I'm sorry, was also asking about, is there a link to the 6-week course?
Yes, let me type this in real quick.
Okay.
Yeah. So the way you do it, and you go to Renify first, and it is about $20 to join, depending on which tier. They're all the same tier, right? Everybody gets the same thing, but the pricing's a little different depending on whether you go monthly or 2 months or 5 months. But once you join that, you're not actually signing up for that class in particular. You're joining Renify, and then we have 6 different 6-week classes that we put on during the year. We've got about 10 different events that happen on a weekly basis, and we've got 4 or 5 or 6 of them that happen on a quarterly basis. You're joining that whole thing, and then you just go in and find the event, the course for the Reframing ADHD. Sign up for it, RSVP for it, so you get notifications when it comes in, when it starts. But yeah, you're not signing up just for that course. You're signing up for the entire package that we have, with 2 exceptions. We only have 2 things that cost extra, but we're not going to cover that right now. For the most part, when you sign up with Renify, you get everything we have except for those 2 things.
Great.
So we wanted to do everything for $20, but as a practical matter, there's some things you just can't deliver because they're too labor intensive, right? And so we couldn't do things that took a lot of our time for $20 a month. It's not possible to deliver that. So, but we wanted to deliver it, so we put them on as add-ons. And we're guaranteed, if you get in there 14 days later, you don't like it, you just tell us. You just, we refund it, and piece of cake.
Yep.
All right, Keith, thank you. Any last minute questions that are in there that I didn't see? I'm not good at reading.
No, I think everybody just, they were very thankful. Really, I think this was there was some great conversation in the chat. We really appreciate everybody sharing. This again is one of those topics I think too often we just don't get time to address it, but it is really important. And I think those of us that are dealing with ADHD is part of our life. When you think about it, that reframing exercise is a big piece of the work. And so I'm just glad we've got places like this and partners like you to have these conversations with. So thanks so much.
It is a lot of work, and people need to realize behavioral change is hard because we have all these forces acting on us. So it is very difficult, and we can't do it alone. You just can't. It's like, I don't know, being a spacewalker outside of the shuttle, right? They can't do anything because there's nothing to push against, right?
Right.
We are social creatures. We need other people around us that are going in the direction that we're going in. So yeah, enough said. Hopefully you people join us, and it's always great talking to you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will talk to you again soon, Rick. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining us. We will see you again soon.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
All right.